CloudDB, shaping your new normal.
All right, welcome everyone to the 2021 APAC Groundbreakers Virtual Tour by Apaco UC. This year, our event will be the biggest one ever done with 144 sessions, including normal sessions, workshops, and hands-on labs from 100 different speakers over 17 days. Also, it will cover sessions in 4 different languages, and please remember to register to as many sessions as you can. I would like to say thanks to all Oracle user groups and Java user groups that made this event possible, and also to our sponsors, Oracle Groundbreakers, and our main sponsor, CloudDB. Now for today's session, it's the little things that matter, a look at database migration gotchas by Aishwarya Kala. Please, if you have any issues during this session, use the chat option in the menu to let me know, and I will try to help you the best as possible. Also, if you have any questions to the speaker during the session, please use the chat option, and the speaker will be answering all questions by the end of the session. Now, without any more delays, I would like to leave you with this amazing session by Aishwarya Kala. It's all with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Francisco. Good evening, everyone. And I'm Aishwarya, and today we're going to talk about database migrations and upgrades. So let's get started. About me, I am from a region in India where it does snow, so you can see hence the gear I'm in. But yeah, the part of India where it can get cold. Other than that, I'm working with Pitching. This is and I'm not place, and you can see things. This is about Pitching. We are a company which has been 24 years in business. We specialize in Google Cloud, a variety and range of cloud services and offerings. About today, so what are we going to talk about or going to discuss? So you can see a jumble of words right there on the screen. That is our agenda, and we're just going to make sense out of it and figure out what is important and what are the things we often end up missing, or just slides from our attention when working on an upgrade or a migration project. So let's get started. So one of the first things that we have to focus on when we are working on a project is where are we going? That is, which database version or which database platform do we want to go to, and that is restraint. We have some restraints around it. So the primary restraint for our decision would be an application compatibility, as we pretty well know. So let's say, what do we mean by database application compatibility? What we want to know is our application compatible with a specific database version or not? And this is the must know, and the good to know would be OS and kernel that your application is compatible with. Why? Well, you want to standardize everything on your organization. You want your system admins, or you want your infrastructure to be as standardized as possible. So let's say, for the sake of argument, or for our example, that we decide that our application is, or we are told that our application is 19C compatible and OEL compatible, then we go to this very familiar screen and we plug in this information, the 19C and OEL. What we get is, again, a very familiar screen. We get the list of things that are certified. Now, this is where you pick up your certification matrix. We look up the exact OEL versions. Again, very familiar. Everybody is pretty familiar. Now, this is where let's try and look at what is the information that we are receiving. If you look at it, what you see is the database 19C is certified with Linux 8 Update 1+. This is not the end of it. Rather, this is the beginning of this particular exercise that we're talking about. So the thing to note over here is this portion. This is the first thing to know. What does this mean? This simply means that this is giving you a minimum version or a minimum RU of your database that you can go to, and it is offering you a choice. Do you want to be on the GUK channel or the RSC, the Red Hat compatible channel, or the unbreakable kernel, Express kernel? So these are the options that you have to be careful about when you're looking at this. Now there are a few other things to note. Let's just quickly skim through that. There's a document, there's a faint option at the end of the screen that's highlighted. But this document, by just if you look at the name, it can be misleading. It is not just about ACFS. Very importantly, this is about ASM FD as well, your filter driver. Now, why is that important? Because if you want to use ASM, which is a standard, a pretty, a pretty useful and an option that is very widely used. That's what I wanted to say. So, if you want to use this, you want to know what are the versions that are compatible with your ASM filter driver. So, as we talked about earlier, there were two options when we looked at it, the two channels, the RHC compatible and the UUK compatible, as you see on the screen. So if you look at the versions, you had a minimum cap that was provided by your compatibility matrix. Now, this particular document kind of adds your upper limit, that if you want to use ASM, you can only go up to 19.12. Or if you want, and similarly for the OS, you've got an upper cap for the OS as well. Now, what is the difference? If you look at this carefully, your ASM FD, if you intend to use an ASM FD, you cannot go beyond 19.10 as of now. So these are little things that you have to be careful about, because if you download the software, apply an RU, and you're set up with 19.11, then you can, you try and test when you come to a state where you want to build out your ASM FD, you will see that your ASM filter driver is not supported. So in order to avoid these problems, you can beforehand look up these documents and determine the version that you want to exactly go to. Now again, this is a utility that comes with the software where you can just check your ASM AFD drivers support. Moving on. So we talked about that, there were two versions or two options that we were looking at with our example. We could either go with the OEL or the RHC theme. How do we take a decision about that? We probably need a system admin option. They could provide us with the channels that the organization is subscribed to, and that would be a factor in for us to take our decision. Now that leaves us with the next question. Okay, fine, we're going with RHC. What are the versions that we want to finally choose between 19.7 to 19.12? That's the decision that we now need to take. So what would be the factors that would affect this decision? Well, usually we always are inclined for the latest and greatest versions, and in most cases that is a good option. But there are a few things you should always have in the back of your mind, or at least you should have cross-checked, or is recommended to be cross-checked. What are those? Let's see. Well, known issues. That's what you want to be aware of, right? So every version, every patch advisory comes with a critical issues or known issues documents, associated documents for the April or the January 21 critical issues document IDs. What we're looking out for in this document are any bugs that might potentially crash your system or could affect your query result, or anything that seems or you deem dangerous enough that you want to avoid that version till a bug fix is in place. So just something to be careful about. You don't want to migrate to a new system and end up with a bug that is crashing your new system. So another thing just to be careful about. Now one more thing is we've got these advisories about recommended one-off patches. So this is another document that you can skim through. We've got a separate one for Exadata as well. So these are things that can help mitigate the issues that you run into while migrating or after migrating. So here's an important, another kind of handy tip, as I would say. This information is probably valid for a target, the system that you're upgrading to, right? What about the source? There are certain scenarios where you would want to patch your source as well. There are bugs with data pump, there are bugs with DBUA or rack where you want your source system to be patched so that these utilities are useful and your migration goes on seamlessly. So again, not a bad idea to just go through this document, review if there are any necessary patches, especially if you're working in an organization where you are supposed to provide a list of patches that are to be downloaded or procured. In such scenarios, it's always recommended to just go through these documents, get the patches you need at one go. Right. So another short quick thing you probably know is GI ASM compatibility, because the compatibility is ASM compatibility well known. Now the only thing to be careful about here would be the flex ASM. So especially if you're consolidating and you plan to run a database that is lower than 12C on your rack cluster, which has flex ASM enabled, then you could run into a scenario when you try to start up your instance post your migration, this would happen. The instance just would not begin or just would not start on node 4. Why is that? That's because the default cardinality of flex ASM cluster is 3. So you would have an ASM here on node 1, node 2, and node 3, but no ASM, local ASM on node 4, and any database with a lower version needs this. So this would lead to a problem, and of course this has this as a very easy fix. You can check the cluster mode and you can modify the ASM count. This will ensure that your local instances for ASM are available in all the nodes and they can be used. So one small thing that we need to be careful about. Major thing we need to be careful about is enable the bug fixes. With PSUs, you get bug fixes, but they are disabled. Why? Because they have the potential to change optimizer behavior. During the usual security patching, we're not too concerned with this, but when during the usual security patching, we do not. If you are not testing for optimizer changes, if you're not conducting a thorough application testing, then it's okay. But when you're moving to a new system, please remember to enable these and test. That's it. You can enable it using the DBMS option bundle. And for upgrades and rebuilds, it's highly recommended that you often miss enabling the bug fixes. So do it. Make sure that you have the latest optimizer fixes in as well. So this is the checklist kind of thing that we had. We just discussed about what are the things or the bug fixes or the various factors that we should keep in mind when we're choosing the versions of our databases. Moving on. The next thing we want to do is we want to prepare the system we're going to go to. We're going to upgrade to or migrate our database to, right? So for that, one of the first things is a very a low-hanging fruit. Make sure that your system security patches are up to date. Another thing often missed is RPMs and tools. So we've got custom RPMs in place. Let's say you've got a MFA configured, right? You've got monitoring or a cloud agent in place on your server. So these are the things that you would have to prepare a list of from your source target, gather that information, and use that on your target. Again, similarly, that's the case for OS tools and utilities that you would probably use or are used by some scripts or tools, or you would want on your new systems. So this would be a really good time to get a standard list of additional software that you need on your system, prepare the list, get the approvals, and put it in place on the target system. Similarly, another very interesting thing, in fact, is the time zone. So, okay, time zone, time date, CPL tells is a time zone, and as you can see, it's America, New York in this particular example. But why do we care about time zone? Such a typical thing. Well, we care because sysdate and systimestamp functions of our database, they do not use database time zone, right? They in fact use a system called get time of day, and this impacts the behavior of a simple command like select sysdate from dual. Now, what I mean is the behavior is different for discrete connections versus connections that are established over a listener. Let's take a look at what happens. So here's a simple example. I log on to my server and I issue a very simple systimestamp from dual. I see it's -4. Now I export a time zone variable UTC, and again my time zone now is displayed in UTC. Earlier it was America, EST. So as you see, what essentially is happening is it is displaying the time zone from when your system begins. So when your session begins, right? So this is the behavior that happens in your discrete connections. Whereas for your listener connections or the connections that are established over listener, the time that you see from the same command would be of the time zone variable as it was when the instance was started. Now, on your rack system, this is controlled by a file called which is available in your GI home. And this particular file, this is the way it looks. This has this variable called TZ or time zone, where you can define and control your time zone variable. and this would be used by a listener. This is supposed to be used by a cluster or a grid when your cluster and grid are starting up. But there have been instances, and again, if you have to make any changes to this, you need to restart your cluster-based stack. But there have been multiple instances where this is set to, let's say, America, New York, but we've noticed that for some reason or the other, it's not picking up. For example, over here, it's a four-node cluster. On the nodes 1, 2, and 3, if I establish a connection using a listener, I see that my timestamp is -7, that's Phoenix, and in node 4, it's -6, that's Denver. So this is quite amusing because our env config variable did have the correct time. It had the correct time zone rather. So what happened, or how do you troubleshoot? There's this file called, sorry, not a file. You can check the environment variable. You can, take the smon, take the pmon. You should ideally take the pmon, but I'm using smon in this example because this is as per a Metalink document. I think I have the notes somewhere in the slides. So take the smon, you can view the variables and you can check what was the variable that was picked up when the session was started. And as you can see, it's highlighted. It was America Denver and not the one that was in our configuration file. So the way around it is you just provide the time zone in your SRVCTL, you just set the environment, and then you have to restart the instance or the bit, or depending on how many instances or how many places, cluster where you want to make the changes, you have to restart the affected component. In our case, it was the instance, and of course the listener also gets restarted. Moving on. So this is another interesting thing. So tempfiles.d. So Unix 7 onwards, it introduces a new daemon for managing the temp files. And the default behavior of this daemon is to delete from temp and where temp after a certain number of days. You can see this configuration file, the temp.conf, in etc as well. Usually there is a configuration file. Okay. So again, why do we care, or why is it important to us? It's important to us because in temp, Oracle stores IPC or socket files which are used for IPC, inter-process communication. So if by any chance we've got a software or we've got tempfiles.d daemon that is deleting all these files, it can be extremely dangerous for our, and it can lead to outages. So this will be a scenario you do not want to deal with. You can review these blogs and notes for all the bad things that can happen or how dangerous this can be. But the recommendation from Oracle themselves is to exclude these paths and make sure that your daemon does not touch any files or any socket files in these directories. And the way to accomplish this is just edit your configuration file of the daemon, restart the daemon, and then you can just to verify that the configuration is properly being set and these paths are excluded. So this is something that is almost a must-have, especially if you're using GI and RAP, but this should not be missed. The other thing is good to have would be the Timeserver. Now Linux introduces cron as a new option for Timeserver to manage entity. Now we noticed across a lot of servers, a lot of times for various different clients, what happens is that after you upgrade or you move to a Linux 7 server, you will end up with all these warnings either in your CVU when you're running your cluster verification utility or even in your CRS logs. Right? This is the exact point that you can run into. Warnings are all associated with NTP, and it says that for some reason NTP is not performing the way it should. Now, what we've noticed is that you've got NTPD, which is your traditionally Linux 7 thing that has always been there, which is something that wants to control your NTP. And then you've got cron, which is the new thing that is always that is something that also wants to control the NTP. That leads to conflicts. Now, how does NTP come there? Because NTPD come in picture because cron is the new default. What happens is that there are a lot of times there are automations or scripts, playbooks, which actually go and set up the NTPD configuration. So this is something you should be careful about that you disable, you either stick with NTPD or cron. Take a decision, and whatever it is, you'll have to configure. If you are sticking with NTPD, it would be the ntpd.conf or it would be the cron.conf. Let's say you want to stick with the latest standards or the latest recommendation, that's cron. Then you disable the NTPD, you disable the NTPD daemon, right? And just make sure that system is enabled, NTPD returns are disabled in our case, because you want to stick with cron. And the other thing is, make sure that your chronic configuration is defined so that it is a recommendation to use an internal server, your organization's time server. So you can set up your cron.conf. And yeah, I mean, again, this blog talks about it in detail. And if you don't set up, you can get some very weird time servers like russianbribes.net, from which your organization will be fetching time, because this is basically an entity free buffer, entity free pool that we use to fetch time. So yes, a tip: if you are on RAG, do check the entity slew settings so that your time is implemented gradually. Another best practice thing is that with storage, make sure your disks are sized appropriately. That is, they have the same sizes. Especially when you're consolidating the database, just use a snippet, make sure that you know which disks are mapped to which particular OS device, and then you can use kfed to just ensure that you are not overwriting any particular disk, just as a best practice. Now, another thing that is a good to do thing would be ensure that physically your partitions are aligned. This is parted. SDM1 is my partition. I just want to check if it is aligned. It is, the physical sectors are aligned. I've checked it. And once I've checked it, I'll just label it. A small thing to notice is that if this is a new installation, there is this parameter called -init. That's what we need to use with ASM, with AFD, right? So to ensure that to label your disks, because your filter driver has not yet been initialized. The installation is not yet done. If this is a new installation, you want to mark your OCR drives, then OCR disks rather, then this is the way to do it. Another thing to notice is that if you're using an RPM, a pre-installation RPM, the pre-installation RPM will set defaults in your kernel settings, especially with regards to memory, as memory can differ from server to server. Go back and just double check your configuration. Don't forget your use pages. Make sure your memlock is properly defined based on your system limits. You might need to lower it or increase it based on whatever your RAM is. But make sure it's there. Make sure your use pages are configured, and you are using the parameter use large pages, use underscore large underscore pages in your init or your database. Another thing is reboot your database, reboot your server after your configuration is complete. So this is just a best practice, but you do not want to wait for an issue to reboot and see that all your configuration is persistent. So this is a very good thing. This is something that is recommended to validate your persistent configurations. Another best practice is if you want to configure auto start, so that especially for standalone databases with GI or not with GI, it is a good idea to always have your auto start configured, and this can be done with systemd services. The benefit of using systemd is that one, you can use along with DB and DB start and DB start scripts would be one, you've got the very familiar ORATAP console, which you can use to control things. It can handle database as well as listeners. But the thing is, if you're using custom listeners, then you would need to go and do not forget to update your DB shut or start scripts with the name of your custom non-default listeners rather. So how you do it, you can use this template, you can use this DB service file where I'm we're making a call to the start and shut service, scripts, and just reload the daemon, ensure that it's enabled, the service is enabled, and reboot the server and test it. Right? So when we're talking about preparation, these are the things that we want to, again, be careful about. You're doing an upgrade, a database migration, or a database upgrade. Now, another important aspect of doing this is identifying the client resource. So why do we want to identify what clients are connecting to our database, and how do we do it? So the first thing that we want to know is where to make these changes, the TMS updates, the firewall rules. So for that, what we need is a client host to be executed. The other thing that we want to know is we want to know whether a client is using or what protocol a client is using. Why do we need this? We want to make sure that our certificates are up to date. We don't want to go to a new, we don't want our client to experience an issue after we migrated our database, right? We want our certificates to be current. So if our certificates are changed, that, I mean, if a client is using a TCP/IP protocol, that is a candidate where we need to perhaps provide the new certificate too. So that's another thing that we need to be aware about. So we want to know the connection protocol. Again, another thing that we want to know is the ciphers. When we upgrade a database, there are times that old cipher suites are being depreciated and deprecated and or not supported. In that case, our client again will run into issue. So we want to know the version of our client, the version from which our client is, the version on which our client is running from. So again, this is another thing that we would want to know. Similarly, if you run it, I mean, this is a case where you can run into authentication errors. So in this case, is a very common problem where you run into authentication errors if you're using a lower version clients. And the workaround for this is to ensure that your allowed logon server version, this parameter in your SQLnet.ora, has been set to a version that's greater than whatever version the client is of. Right? Now, this has a slight dependency on something called password-based insensitivity. What happens is that you might see a very misleading invalid username password error, which is actually not due to you inputting an incorrect password, but it is because you're using the value setting of your allowed logon server version, which is not compatible to this entire case. So the basic thing is, if you want to allow a lower version client to connect to your database, right? And you want to use case insensitivity, you want it to be a case insensitive thing, then that will not work that might not work directly. So what would be the workarounds? The workarounds would be, one, you make it case sensitive, right? You allow the lower version clients to connect and you make the authentication case sensitive. Or the second workaround would be, you allow the lower version clients to connect and you want to still enforce case insensitivity, you want it to be false. In that case, you have to reset the passwords of your users on your database. Why? This is because, and restart the listener. Why? This is because your when you reset the password and you have got case sensitive set to false, you get a password version set which will show a version of 10G, which actually means that now your password is case insensitive, right? So by default, it is not case insensitive. It was created on a higher version. So you will need to reset this password to make the password case insensitive. So it's a bit tricky when you want to allow lower version clients to connect to your database, and you want to allow lower version clients to connect to your database, and you also want to want to you want to allow lower version clients to connect to your database, and you want to enforce case.
Hello, everyone. Just looks like Kala just got disconnected for a second. Let's just wait if she's come back in online. Let me try to ping her. Apologize, everyone. Just trying to get reach of her. I'm sure she's continuing doing this session, and she didn't notice she lost internet. Let's give her a couple minutes. If she don't join, we will ask her to pre-record this session one more time, and that by tomorrow I can have the playback link to share with everyone. Basically, what you're going to see is that in your agenda in the conference page, in the top, you're going to see attendant, and then you're going to see your agenda. You're going to go to this session, and then you're going to see the link for the replay, and you can watch the replay onto the all sessions that are going 24 hours after their live streaming in the conference page. Let's take a look. And nothing yet from her. Okay, let's wait one more minute. If not, I will just go into the plan B. Apologies again, everyone. I know that a lot of people in India was telling me that they are having power issues, and hopefully that was not the case. Okay, Aishala is back. I can see you, Aishala. You are in mute. Aishala, can you hear me? I'm starting the video. Aishala, can you hear me?
Right.
Yes, okay.
I'm sorry.
You just got disconnected?
Okay, I did not realize I got disconnected.
Yeah, I listened to you double. Let me just disconnect from my other one. Okay, can you share your screen? There we go, I see you sharing. Anyone knows where she was when she got disconnected? At what point? If you can help me by the chat. Oh, you know where you were? Okay. Okay. Apologies. Okay, Shana, I can see your screen, but I cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you. I will put myself on mute.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so I'll continue from here. I apologize for the drop in session. I'll quickly continue from here. So we were talking about what to identify, the host, protocol, version, and character sets, and these are the things that we want to identify. Let's see how to identify them. So one of the easiest way to identify would be the audit trail. You can have a create session auditing, and if you do so, then you get a lot of information. But there are a few problems. This is what you see if you do a DPP audit. Now, the audit trail could get pretty exhaustive, right? You don't want to get into that. Now, the other thing is that you're not getting information about client host, the protocol, as well as the versions. Now, just to take that, if you're using unified audit trail, this would be your audit trail. The view where you get this information, and this is often a very underused view, this would be the $V session connect info. Here you can get your information about your machine as well as your client version. And we'll also see that it also provides us with the protocol as well. Now, after 12c, this is a very robust view. But before 12, you have to use a function to convert and use to convert your to get your exact client version, and you can use the X view ks use con. This particular view would give you the information that you're seeking. Again, as I mentioned, you also get the TCPS information from this particular view. Now, as you notice, this view does not store the information. It is a dynamic view. You do not store this information in a historical. It does not store the historical information. One way to do it could potentially be to create an after login trigger. Now, triggers can be a bit tricky, and you don't want to get over. You don't want to. If you want to play it safe, there's another way. You already have this information. That's in your listener and scan logs. So it's highly recommended that you skim through your listener and scan logs, and you get this particular information. As I mentioned, listener logs have your client version, they have your client protocol, and most of the information that you are looking for. So I've highlighted the box version equal to some XYZ number, right? How do you interpret it? So you can interpret it using the same function that we looked at a bit earlier. This is _op_version function. As you see, you can use this particular function and interpret the exact client version. Right? You can see when it's 12c, you can see which host is connecting as 19c. In fact, go a bit further, you can use a small snippet and scrub your listener log, and you can get the exact client versions that are used to connect to your database or the protocols that are used. Now, this helps you identify that, okay, for example, 10.46.23.140 is a host where I need to send this host an SSL certificate, so it's prepared for the migration, right? Or I now know that my all my clients are either 12c or 19c. So when I migrate or upgrade my database, I know what to check for in terms of compatibility, driver compatibilities, and any of that kind of stuff. So this gives us a very handy piece of information and a lot of details, right? Since we lost a bit of time, let me just be quick to it. So you can use this particular, go through these links and analyze this stuff further. And as I was talking about the compatibility, this is what we were talking about in terms of client compatibility. Now, when you're migrating the database, one of the things that we need to be careful about is the service migration. Let's take a look at this example where you want to migrate using a data guard, right? So you've got this setup where you've got a primary, you've got a data guard, and the services in use is ORCL and App1, right? And ORCL A and the data guard is ORCL B. Moving on, you do a switchover. Once you do a switchover, you move your services ORCL and App1 over to your new primary, that is ORCL B, right? But what you notice is that one of the client is facing issues. What could that be? The reason is, this is a particular error. The reason is, this particular client was using SID of the primary, old primary, and not a service. So in such cases, again, it's another recommendation would be that if your SID is changing, it would be a good idea to have an additional service by the name of that particular old SID. That will help you connect to this particular primary, help a smooth migration. And what's more, you can use $B session connect info after you migrated to identify the clients from which, or the clients that are using this particular new service or the temporary service. And once you've identified, you can then make sure that the client configuration is updated to use the proper service, and then you can phase out this temporary service. So, in order to ensure that this entire process is smooth and you're not on a call after a migration waiting for hours trying to troubleshoot the problem, it could be a good idea to just have that additional service in play, figure out the problem, and as soon as you're done with the migration, just view this, go through this particular view, identify and fix it then, right? So this could be an alternative approach if it suits you. Again, another important thing with logical migrations is that be careful about immutable properties. Now, in general, whenever we are performing an immutable, logical migration, in general, a very bare bone common thread is that you've got a source, you build an empty target, and you have some form of technique in which you're moving data from source to target, right? So the thing over here is your target is pre-built, and it is very difficult to modify things like the block size, character set after it's built out. So review the immutable properties as well as the init file when you are doing your upgrades or migrations, especially in case of logical migrations. Now, encryption wallet is another thing that you need to be careful around. Now, what needs to change is a bit differ a bit in case of upgrades as well as migrations. If you're working with migrations, then in that case you will need to transfer the wallet itself to the target from your source, as well as update the SQLnet.ora file. Okay. Now, when you're working on upgrades, in that case as well, you would need to make sure that your new home, your target home, is aware of your wallet location. So you can, either update the new SQLnet.ora or just copy over the SQLnet.ora from your source to your target. These are the two scenarios, and these are the two actions that you need to take to ensure that your wallet is accessible in both the cases. Okay? Another thing to be careful about is validate that your wallets have the correct passwords, the correct certificates stored in the wallets in case it is being used for that as well. Now, for statistics, if you're doing an upgrade or migration, gather data, dictionary, and fixed object statistics. That just makes it quicker. The process is quicker, right? If you're using data pump, a tip would be to use DBMS stats to transfer the statistics versus using data pump to export and import the statistics. DBMS stats is just quicker, way quicker in all scenarios. You can use these packages to pack and unpack. Another best practice would be SQL plan management. Create SQL profiles and baselines. Capture your SQL baselines, pack them, transport them, and unpack them, and make sure that your SQL plans and your profiles and baselines are present on your target or your upgraded version, so that your performance is stable. So this itself is a big topic, but just be sure that you are giving it the due importance or the importance that it does deserve. Spend some time over here analyzing to make sure that your performance remains stable. Again, another thing, these are very standard things that you all know about, object validations, archive logs, but make sure that these are a part of your checklist and they're not missed. Now, some of the last things that we want to go through is ACLs. ACLs are, again, if you're moving from 11G, it's very important to have ACLs mapped out. Look at what are the privileges of the packages that are being used in 11G or your source, and then prepare the ACLs. Make sure that you have a plan in place that covers those ACLs, and you create them after you have moved to the target host, right? Similarly, resource storage has had a change in behavior. Your unlimited table space is no longer a part of your resource store. So it could be a scenario where your schema had resource, right? And thereby it had all the privileges that it needed. Now it needs new quotas and new privileges. So you would need to identify and provide those table space related grants to make sure that your schema functions. Otherwise, it will just keep running into space issues. Another, very avoidable problem. Cron job. Migrate the cron jobs, test them out. You can schedule them via tags so that it becomes easier on the migration day to actually move it. One of the tips would be make sure that the timing of your cron job remains the same, because you want to avoid noisy neighbor situations where, suppose there are you're consolidating and there are multiple databases, you end up picking up backups on the same time. You don't want that, right? You want to stick to a schedule that was working earlier. And of course, you should test it and debug your scripts beforehand, not after the migration. Be careful about the changes in script variables. Many a times they tend to go unnoticed. Again, important thing is validate your scheduler jobs. Now with 19C, the jobs are automatically transformed into scheduler jobs, the DBA jobs. But there are certain things. For example, if your DBA job was unscheduled and you plan to, you've temporarily broken your DBA your job that was scheduled using DBA jobs, and you want to use it after a month or so, you want to reschedule it. What will happen is when this job is transformed into a scheduler job, not only does it equivalent of being broken is it will not be scheduled in your DBA scheduler jobs. So what happens is it loses the interval. For example, there was a specific interval at which that job was running. Now, in the scheduler job, that information will be lost. So, if you plan to keep that job unscheduled after moving to DBA scheduler as well, make sure that you copy over the interval information and you set it. Right? Otherwise, you are going to lose that information about what your previous schedule was after you decommission your old database. So, that is one thing that you need to be careful about. The other thing is statistic jobs. There are many times that there are duplicates. Make sure that is eliminated, and review the performance, especially during the maintenance window, because with the latest versions there are always new advisor jobs that kick in. So it's always a good idea, for at least 2 or 3 weeks to monitor the maintenance window to make sure that it is something that is working for your particular new version of the database. Again, another small thing is the external credentials, the OS credentials. On the new host, most likely passwords for your example, if you've got an OS user called Oracle or an OS user called Pickle, these passwords are probably going to change on the new host. So you would need to update your credentials if credentials are in use. Similarly, make sure that your directories and NFS mounts are in place. All your ETL jobs or backups. And the last thing, you have to be careful about backups. Make sure that your agents are in place, your catalog connectivity is there, you've got enough free disks. And most importantly, you are backup ready the minute you complete your migration or your upgrade. Last thing is ORACheck. Make sure you have an AHF installed. You do get a TFS-ETL with your grid installed, but your grid installation, but your 19C GI is empty. So it's always a good recommendation that you install AHF, generate the ORACheck report. By empty, I mean this is a snippet of a 19C standalone TFS-ETL, it's 0 bytes. So it doesn't work, you will have to install it. So, and once you've set up your system, run a quick ORACheck report that will give you an assessment of or a health check of how you've set up, what is your health score, how you are in terms of your configuration, and you can fix the warnings there and then itself before you've actually the actual go live. So it is a very good or a handy tool and a very good scenario to use it. So use it and make sure you are, and the other thing that you can do is you can schedule this at home. You can use it to, once you install the AHF, right? You install your AHF, you review the various tools that are there, and you can configure this in daemon mode. What this does is it will run in background, and you can say, let's say you schedule it to generate a report every once a month, right? So every first of month, an OracleMania report will be generated and delivered to your inbox. So you can do all these things when you're with OracleMania, and it's very handy and extremely useful. Tip: be careful about the space consumption. It consumes a lot of space, so you would want to manage what would be the retention of these reports on your system. So this is what our last set of checklists would be. All these things that you should be careful about, and at the end, do not forget to shut down the source. The last thing you want is somebody using your old source and your data getting all messed up. So with that, I would like to end this session. There are a few things that are good to check, but not really. I know I'm probably running over, but good to check things I've just included if you want to use. And there are a few things in the appendix as well. But hopefully all these things are helpful to you, and once you go through these documents or all these checklists, it kind of makes it easier and more smoother process for you to migrate over to the new systems. Are there any questions? I don't see any questions. Francisco, I can't hear you. Is it only me?
Sorry, thank you so much, Kala. I was in mute.
Okay.
Dimitri, yes, you'll be able to see the recording in a couple of days. When you go to the attendees tab in the top of the page of the conference, you can go there, click there, then go to your schedule, your agenda, your personal agenda, and there you will have a link. Currently, you have your link right there to assist the streaming, but that will be replaced by the link of the replay around 48 hours after each session. Then you will be able to watch as many times as you want until the end of the event on the 22nd, 11th of December. Any questions for Kala? Okay, looks like there's no questions, Kala.
All right.
And saying that, thank you so much. Excellent presentation as always, and hope that everyone take care and keep safe on these pandemic times, and wish that we can see each other again in face-to-face events very soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I apologize for the glitch, but thank you so much.
Now, thank you. And thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening and be safe. CloudDB, shaping your new normal.